Every compliment you give her is a coin deposited into an account she never asked you to open. Every, "You look amazing tonight." Every, "I'm so lucky to have you." Every, hearty text at 11 p.m. When she posted a photo you both know took 45 minutes to stage, you think you're investing. You think you're building something. You think the more praise you pour into her, the more devotion flows back. That's the lie. The common belief, the one your mother taught you, the one romantic comedies drilled into your skull, the one every female friend you've ever had reinforced, is that women want to feel appreciated, valued, seen. And if you just keep showing her how much she means to you, she'll mirror that energy back 10-fold. Here's what actually happens. The more you validate, the less she values the validator. Your admiration becomes ambient noise, background radiation. She stops hearing it the same way you stop hearing traffic when you live next to a highway. It doesn't register anymore. And when something doesn't register, it doesn't generate desire. It generates a slow, unnamed boredom that she will eventually call falling out of love. And here's the part that makes this worse than you think. It doesn't even matter how sincere you are. It doesn't matter that you genuinely mean every compliment. Sincerity without scarcity is still worthless. You can hand a starving man a piece of bread, and he will be grateful. Hand the same man 10 loaves a day, every day, without asking for anything in return, and within a month, he will stop saying thank you. Within a year, he will be annoyed when you're 5 minutes late with the delivery. The mechanism doesn't care about your intentions. It only reads the supply. But here's the part that no one discusses, the part that will restructure everything you think you know about attraction. The moment you stop, the moment the stream of validation dries up, not as a tactic, but as a consequence of becoming a man whose approval actually costs something, a neurological alarm fires in her brain that she cannot silence. And she starts chasing, not because you manipulated her, because you accidentally revealed that you were the drug, and she didn't realize she was addicted until the supply disappeared. What I'm about to show you goes deeper than tactics, deeper than play hard to get. There's a specific psychological architecture documented in clinical research and visible across centuries of recorded history. That explains exactly why withdrawal of male validation triggers obsessive pursuit in women. And there is one mechanism, the third one I'll reveal, that is so counterintuitive it will make you question every relationship you've ever had. Let's crack it open. The ancient Romans had a word that modern psychology has only recently rediscovered: fastidium. It meant the disgust that arrives from excess, the revulsion that follows saturation. They used it to describe what happens when a senator eats so much at a feast that the sight of food makes him gag, when a patron visits the same bathhouse so many times that the warm water feels like a prison. Fastidium is what happens to your validation in her nervous system. The Romans built entire philosophies around this. Seneca wrote letters warning his students that the man who is everywhere is appreciated nowhere. Ovid, the same Ovid who wrote the Ars Amatoria, the most detailed manual on attraction that antiquity ever produced, understood this at a structural level. He wrote that absence is to love what wind is to fire. It extinguishes the small, it inflames the great. He wasn't being poetic. He was recording observed behavior across thousands of years of Roman social life. The man who made himself scarce, who withheld his attention, who turned his presence into an event rather than a given, consistently generated a quality of pursuit in women that the available man, the constant man, the man who showed up every time, could never produce. Dr. Robert Glover, in his clinical work with many called nice guys, identified a pattern so consistent it might as well be a law of physics. These men believed that if they could just give enough praise, enough attention, enough emotional labor, they would receive love in return. They operated on what Glover called covert contracts, unspoken deals. I validate you, and in exchange, you desire me. The contracts were never signed by the other party, and the payments never came. But it's worse than that. The validation didn't just fail to generate desire, it actively corroded it. Because every time you tell her she's beautiful without her earning the compliment, you communicate something devastating about yourself. My admiration is free. It requires nothing from you. It will arrive whether you invest in me or not. And free things have no market value. Zero. Ask any economist. Ask any woman who left a man who worshipped her for a man who barely noticed her. Esther Velar wrote something in The Manipulated Man that should have been tattooed on the forehead of every man born after 1960. She observed that the man who praises a woman unconditionally does not elevate her. He eliminates himself. He removes himself from the equation of challenge. And without challenge, her brain has no reason to keep solving for him. Think about that. You're not making her feel good. You're making yourself invisible. Pablo Picasso understood this at a cellular level. In the early 1940s, he was involved with Dora Maar, a brilliant photographer, an intellectual equal, a woman who loved him with a ferocity that consumed her. And Picasso gave her almost nothing in return. Not cruelty, something worse, inconsistency. He would paint her obsessively for weeks, then vanish into his work as though she'd evaporated from existence. He never told her she was enough. He never reassured her position. He treated his attention like a scarce mineral, precious, because it could not be predicted. Dora deteriorated. Not because Picasso was exceptional, because the absence of steady validation created a psychological famine. She couldn't stop trying to feed. She painted. She changed her appearance. She showed up uninvited. She competed with every woman who entered his orbit. She was chasing. Now, contrast this with what happened when Françoise Gillot entered the picture. Gillot was different. She didn't chase. She didn't orbit. When Picasso tried to pull his usual disappearing act, she shrugged and went back to her own canvas. When he offered his rare validation, she received it without the desperate gratitude he was accustomed to. For the first time in decades, Picasso chased. He pursued Gillot for months. He showed up at her studio. He made grand gestures. The woman who did not need his validation became the one woman he could not stop validating. The polarity had reversed. And it reversed because Gillot understood something Dora never did. When someone's approval of you is unconditional, their approval becomes worthless. When someone's approval of you must be earned, their approval becomes currency. But this isn't just about withholding. If it were that simple, every cold, emotionally shut down man would have women lining up at his door. They don't. Because what I'm describing is not the absence of warmth, it's the presence of standards. And this next piece explains why the distinction is everything. Here is where it gets dark. When you validate a woman consistently, daily compliments, constant reassurance, reflexive agreement with her opinions, you're not just making her feel good. You're building a piece of her identity. Read that again. You're constructing brick by invisible brick, a portion of her self-concept that depends on your reflection. She doesn't see it happening. Neither do you. But over weeks and months, part of how she understands herself, her attractiveness, her worth, her desirability, becomes wired to your approval. Rollo Tomassi calls this the frame. Whoever sets the frame of a relationship controls its emotional architecture. And when you make yourself the primary source of her validation, you unknowingly build her frame around you. She begins to see herself partially through your eyes. Your admiration becomes a load-bearing wall in the structure of her confidence. Now pull the wall out. When you stop validating, when the compliments slow, when the reflexive praise stops, when you no longer rush to reassure her every insecurity, the structure cracks. She experiences what psychologists call an identity discontinuity. The mirror she'd been looking into every day suddenly goes dark, and the disorientation is visceral. She doesn't think, "He stopped complimenting me. That's too rational, too clean." What she feels is unnamed, a low-frequency anxiety, a sudden hyper-awareness of her appearance. She starts checking herself more, dressing better without a conscious reason, asking questions she never used to ask. "Do you still find me attractive? What are you thinking about?" She is not asking about you. She is asking about herself. She needs the mirror back. She needs the reflection. And the only person who can provide it is the person who took it away. This is the mechanism behind every relationship, where a woman suddenly becomes obsessively attentive the moment a man begins pulling away. It is not about love. It is not about fear of loss. It is about identity repair. She is chasing the version of herself that existed in your eyes. In 1536, the Ottoman Empire was ruled by a Sultan Sulayan, called the Magnificent by the West, the lawgiver by his own people. He had a harem of hundreds. Every woman in that harem existed in a perpetual state of performing for his attention. Every one of them validated him constantly, praised his wisdom, submitted to his will, competed for a single night in his presence. Every woman except one. Hurrem Sultan, originally a slave named Roxolana, did something unprecedented. She challenged him. She withheld easy approval. Historical accounts describe her as witty, sharp, even combative, with the most powerful man on earth. She didn't validate his ego. She engaged his mind. She treated his attention not as a gift to be received with trembling gratitude, but as something he needed to earn from her. Sulayman, a man who could have any woman alive, became so obsessed with Hurrem that he did something no Ottoman sultan had done in 300 years. He married her officially legally. He dismissed the entire harem. He wrote her love poetry. He made a slave his equal in the eyes of the empire, not because she gave him what every other woman gave him, because she was the only one who didn't. Her refusal to validate him freely created an identity fracture in Sulayman himself. Every other woman confirmed what he already believed. He was the greatest man alive. Hurrem introduced doubt, and that doubt, that tiny crack in his self-concept, became an itch. He could not stop scratching. The person who introduces the crack becomes the only person who can seal it. This is the mechanism, not manipulation, not games. The simple, brutal reality that when you are the source of someone's self-reflection, your withdrawal creates a wound only your return can heal. But if you couple this understanding with surface-level tactics, if you turn this into a weapon of emotional withholding, you will destroy her and yourself in the process. Because there's a third layer beneath all of this, one that separates the men who attract from the men who damage, and most men never reach it. Because the first two layers already made them feel powerful enough to stop digging. Withholding is not the answer. I need you to hear this before we go further. The man who simply stops validating, who reads what I've said so far and decides to go cold, to become a wall of emotional nothing, will get a reaction briefly. She'll chase for a week, maybe a month. And then she'll find someone who makes her feel something, anything, and she'll be gone. Because emotional deprivation is not the same as emotional selectivity. Starvation is not a diet. It's death on a timeline. There is a legend about Don Juan that most men misread entirely. They hear the name and they think conquest. They think numbers. They think a man who moved from woman to woman like a man flipping through channels. But what the original legend describes, before it was diluted into entertainment, was something more precise. Don Juan's power was not in his unavailability. It was in his attention when it arrived. The women in those stories were not chasing a man who ignored them. They were chasing a man who, for a single afternoon, had seen them more completely than anyone ever had. His selectivity was not strategic silence. It was the rarity of his full presence. He was there, entirely, and then he was gone, and the contrast between those two states was unbearable. The presence made the absence devastating, not the other way around. This is the distinction that most men who misapply this material completely miss. The goal is not to be the man who is never there. The goal is to be the man who, when he is there, is so fully present, so sharply observant, so unmistakably himself, that his absence creates a silence that cannot be filled. What actually works, what creates the kind of pursuit that doesn't fade after the initial panic subsides, is becoming a man whose validation means something. A man who notices, who sees her, but whose admiration arrives with precision, not on a schedule. A man whose compliment at the right moment carries more voltage than 1,000 "you're beautifuls" on autopilot. David Data wrote about this in terms of masculine polarity. The superior man, he argued, does not withhold his attention from the feminine. He gives it fully, completely, but only to what is real, only to what she has genuinely expressed, only to the moments where she is authentic rather than performing. This is the selective mirror, and it changes everything. When she puts on a dress and fishes for a compliment, the Instagram pose, the strategic pause in front of you, the "does this look okay?" The ordinary man hands over the validation like a trained dog dropping a ball at her feet. "You look incredible, babe." Transaction complete. Desire zero. The selective mirror does something different. He might say nothing about the dress, but later that evening when she says something genuinely sharp or funny, something that came from her, not from a script. He stops, holds eye contact a beat too long, and says that that's why I can't stop thinking about you. He validated, but he validated what she didn't expect. He rewarded authenticity instead of performance. And in doing so, he trained her nervous system to associate realness with his attention. She starts showing him more of herself, not because he demanded it, but because his mirror only activates for the genuine article. This is why Coco Chanel spent her entire life pursuing Boy Capel. Capel was the one man in her world who didn't worship her image. He saw past the fashion, past the persona, past the armor she'd built since childhood in the orphanage. He validated the woman underneath, the fierce, wounded, brilliant strategist, and ignored the performance entirely. When Capel died in a car accident in 1919, Chanel didn't just mourn a lover. She mourned the only mirror that ever reflected her real face. Every relationship she had afterward, with the Duke of Westminster, with artists, with aristocrats, she measured against that single calibration. None of them matched, because none of them saw what Capel saw. None of them validated selectively enough to make their approval feel earned. The practical application of this is surgical. Stop complimenting her appearance by default. Not forever, not as punishment. But recognize that appearance-based validation is the cheapest currency in the male vocabulary. She gets it from strangers, from social media, from coworkers who hold eye contact a second too long. Your beautiful sits in a pile with 10,000 others. Instead, validate what she cannot get validated anywhere else. Her mind, her contradictions, the moments where she accidentally reveals something real. The way you just handled that situation told me more about you than anything you've ever said. I noticed you didn't agree with that person, even though it would have been easier. That's rare. You think differently than anyone I've met. It's almost unsettling. Each statement is specific, repeatable, impossible to dismiss as generic. And each one tells her, I am paying attention in a way no one else does. My approval is diagnostic, not decorative. When your validation becomes diagnostic, when it reflects what she actually is rather than what she's trying to project, she becomes addicted not to your praise, but to your perception. She starts wanting to be around you because you are the only environment where she feels fully seen, not flattered, seen. And the difference between being flattered and being seen is the difference between a sugar rush and actual nourishment. One creates a spike and a crash. The other builds a dependency she doesn't want to break. Now, here is where the science merges with the philosophy in a way that should unsettle you. When a man who has been freely validating suddenly becomes selective, when the vending machine develops a lock, the woman's brain enters a state that neuroscientists call prediction error processing. Her neural circuitry had mapped you. She knew the pattern. She posts a photo. You react. She expresses doubt. You reassure. She hints at insecurity. You rush in with affirmation. The pattern was so reliable, it stopped generating any emotional response, like a clock ticking in a quiet room, present but invisible. When the pattern breaks, the brain's anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for monitoring expectations, sends an emergency signal. Something has changed. The model is wrong. Recalculate. This recalculation is not rational. It is primal. It hijacks her attention. She begins scanning for data, replaying recent conversations, analyzing your tone, your texting patterns, the micro-expressions on your face when she last spoke to you. She is running a forensic audit on the relationship, and she doesn't even know why. She just knows something feels different, and different in the landscape of female psychology triggers more emotional investment than good ever did. Joseph South, in Practical Female Psychology, identified this as the disruption principle. Women are biologically calibrated to monitor relational stability when the emotional landscape shifts even subtly. Her system floods with cortisol and norepinephrine stress hormones. But here's the twist that most people miss. In moderate doses, these chemicals don't create anxiety alone. They create focus, obsessive, laser-targeted focus on the source of the disruption, you. She starts thinking about you more, not less. She starts analyzing your behavior with a precision she never applied when you were praising her daily. She becomes hyper-aware of your moods, your schedule, your attention. She begins without deciding to competing for something she used to receive for free. This is not theory. This is the documented pattern behind every relationship where the woman suddenly woke up after years of taking a man for granted. The switch didn't flip because he became more attractive. It flipped because the prediction model broke. In Renaissance Florence, there was a banking family, not the Medici, but their rivals, the Sai, who understood a version of this principle in economic terms. They had a policy: never lend to anyone who asks. Only lend to those who demonstrate they don't need the money. The logic was counterintuitive, but devastating. The person who doesn't need your resources will use them wisely. The person who begs for them will waste what you give and resent you for not giving more. Your validation works the same way. Give it to the woman who performs for it, and she will consume it, forget it, and demand more. Give it to the woman who earns it through genuine action. Give it sparingly, precisely, and with weight, and she will treasure it like gold. Because the value of a thing is never determined by the thing itself. It is determined by the cost of acquiring it. And the man whose approval costs something is the man she will spend her life trying to afford. There is another story from a different era that crystallizes this with brutal clarity. Lord Byron, the poet, the man whom his contemporaries called mad, bad, and dangerous to know, moved through London society in the early 19th century, leaving a trail of obsession behind him that his admirers documented in diaries, letters, and legal complaints. What made Byron remarkable was not his looks, though he had those. It was not his poetry, though it was extraordinary. It was his absolute indifference to the opinions of people who had not yet earned his respect. He would lavish a woman with the kind of attention that made her feel like the only person on earth, and then he would turn away with the same ease a man turns a page. Not to punish her, not as a tactic, because something else had genuinely caught his attention. He was not performing unavailability. He was unavailable because his inner world was genuinely richer and more demanding than any performance. The women who pursued him most obsessively were the ones who had received just enough of that rare, total attention to understand what they were losing when it turned away. Lady Caroline Lamb, who famously called him mad, bad, and dangerous to know, pursued him with a ferocity that destroyed her social standing. She didn't pursue him because he was cruel. She pursued him because, for a brief window, she had been fully seen by a man whose seeing meant something, and she could not return to being seen by lesser mirrors. But I promised you something earlier. The counterintuitive mechanism, the one that makes you question every relationship you've ever been in. Here it is. When she starts chasing, when she begins investing emotional energy into recapturing your approval, a secondary process activates, one that locks the dynamic in place far more powerfully than the initial disruption ever could. It's called effort justification. The human mind cannot tolerate investing heavily in something it considers worthless. The cognitive dissonance would be unbearable. So, when she starts working for your attention, dressing up for you, initiating plans, being more affectionate, more sexually available, more present, her brain retroactively justifies the effort by increasing your perceived value. He must be worth it, the unconscious logic runs, because look at what I'm doing to keep him. She doesn't decide to value you more. Her brain forces the conclusion to match the behavior. The more she invests, the more valuable you become in her internal economy. The more valuable you become, the more she invests. It feeds itself. This is why the relationships where she had to work for your attention last decades. And the relationships where you handed her everything on a silver platter collapse within months. It is not about what you gave her. It is about what she had to become to earn what you gave. Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, one of the most documented love affairs of the 20th century. Kahlo was extraordinary, a painter of raw, unflinching self-portraits, a woman of ferocious intelligence and pain. Rivera was unfaithful, unreliable. He gave her validation in bursts, explosive adoration, followed by weeks of emotional absence as he chased other women and other projects. By every rational measure, Kahlo should have left. She had reason, she had grounds, she had pride. She didn't leave. She doubled down. She painted him into her work. She tolerated his affairs. She divorced him and then married him again. She wrote in her diary, "I suffered two grave accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down, the other was Diego." She equated him with a catastrophe, and she chose the catastrophe twice. This is not Stockholm Syndrome. This is effort justification operating at full power. The years of emotional labor she invested in that relationship made leaving psychologically impossible. To walk away would mean admitting the investment was wasted, and the human mind will endure almost anything before it will admit that. Now, I am not telling you to be Diego Rivera. Rivera was a disaster as a partner. What I am telling you is that the underlying principle that earned devotion bonds more deeply than given devotion is operating in every relationship you will ever have. And the man who understands this stops trying to buy loyalty with free validation and starts creating the conditions where loyalty is built through investment. Her investment in you in the relationship, in becoming someone worthy of the attention you selectively provide. And here is the part that most teachers of this material gloss over, because it is the hardest part to sell. The selectivity only works if it is real. It only generates the obsessive pursuit we've been describing if it is a genuine byproduct of having standards, of genuinely caring about what is real versus what is performed, of genuinely being a man who has something worth protecting. The moment it becomes a calculated tactic, the moment you are tracking how many compliments you've given today and deliberately holding one back, she will feel it, not consciously. She won't be able to articulate it, but her nervous system, which has been calibrated over millions of years to detect authenticity and male attention, will register the difference between the man who doesn't validate her because he is genuinely unmoved and the man who is performing being unmoved. One of those men is magnetic, the other is just sad. And she will eventually be able to tell the difference, even if it takes her a while. The goal is not to learn a better performance. The goal is to actually become a man whose approval costs something because he has genuine standards that he refuses to compromise. That transformation, when it actually happens, when it stops being a strategy and starts being a character, is when the dynamic becomes self-sustaining, because you are no longer playing a game. You are simply being a man of substance in a world full of men who gave it all away for a text back. So what does this look like when you put it all together? It looks like a man who is warm, but not desperate, present, but not hovering, capable of deep admiration, but unwilling to dispense it cheaply. A man who notices everything and rewards only what is genuine. When she performs, he is unmoved, not cold, unmoved. There's a difference. Cold is punishing, unmoved is sovereign. Cold says, "I am withholding to hurt you." Unmoved says, "That didn't reach me because it wasn't real." When she is authentic, when she drops the mask, says the honest thing, shows the unpolished version, his attention arrives like a searchlight, full, focused, inescapable. And in that moment, she feels more seen than she has ever felt in her life, because his validation is not a participation trophy. It is an award for something she actually did. This man does not need to play games. He does not need to calculate when to text back. He does not need to manufacture emotional distance. His selectivity is not a strategy. It is a byproduct of having standards that he refuses to compromise. And women sense this the way animals sense weather changes, not through logic, through something older, deeper, a calibration system that reads his energy and concludes, this man cannot be bought. This man cannot be fooled. This man sees me, actually sees me, and what he approves of, I want to be more of. That is the engine. Not withdrawal, not games, not silence. Selective, earned, precise validation from a man who values his own judgment enough to make it mean something. The irony is sharp enough to cut. The man who stops trying to make her feel special becomes the most special man she's ever known because he's the first one who made her earn it, and what is earned is kept. Here is the thought I will leave you with. Every woman you've ever lost to boredom, every relationship that died in comfort, every connection that faded into roommate territory, it didn't end because you loved too little. It ended because your love cost nothing, and she could not value what did not cost her. The question is not whether she will chase you. The question is whether you have the spine to become a man worth chasing, a man whose approval is not a gift, it's a verdict. And verdicts from serious men carry weight, that echoes through the rest of her life. Decide what kind of man you are, the one who gives everything and watches it evaporate, or the one who gives precisely, watches it compound, and never wonders again why she stays. If this rewired something in you, if you felt the shift while listening, subscribe. This channel is for men who would rather know the uncomfortable architecture of desire than keep building on a foundation that was always going to crack. Here's the thought I will leave you with. Every woman you've ever lost to boredom, every relationship that died in comfort, every connection that faded into roommate territory, it didn't end because you loved too little. It ended because your love cost nothing, and she could not value what did not cost her. The question is not whether she will chase you. The question is whether you have the spine to become a man worth chasing. A man whose approval is not a gift, it's a verdict. And verdicts from serious men carry weight that echoes through the rest of her life. Decide what kind of man you are, the one who gives everything and watches it evaporate, or the one who gives precisely, watches it compound, and never wonders again why she stays. If this rewired something in you, if you felt the shift while listening, subscribe. This channel is for men who would rather know the uncomfortable architecture of desire than keep building on a foundation that was always going to crack. Thanks to our forged brothers for their support, you are helping more men learn what it takes to attract women naturally. And with that, see you in the next video.